I've been raped and abused by both men and women. To this day, I still fear when a phone rings, I still get anxious. 5 boys that I know of were being raped, essentially, by their mothers. When I say no support, I mean no support, right? It was not an easy journey. It really wasn't.
There are some stories that are so brutal that you actually don't want to read them. But those are the stories that must be told so that we cannot repeat what happens inside them. And so that's why I've invited Martin. He is the founder of MatrixMen, and he's going to be chatting to us today about his story and the book, The Pumpkin Van. Martin, thank you so much for coming onto the show with us.
Thanks, Kim. I didn't like the brutal part, but,
It was brutal. The brutal part for me is that I am a parent. And although I mess up on several occasions,
don't we all?
The kinds of things that were written inside this book, the kinds of trauma that you went through, the kinds of things that boys on a regular basis go through and we don't actually know about it, that to me was the brutal part. The story was incredibly intriguing. It read beautifully and it's very raw and vulnerable about you. But there are parts in that book that make me think this should not happen. It shouldn't be allowed to happen and we shouldn't be ignoring it. And that's why I say that it was brutal for me.
Yeah.
So Martin, in this book, you paint the picture of the situation that you went through from when you were 13 years old until when you were about 19 years old, when you were in the grips of a relationship with a pedophile.
Yeah.
And when I was looking at your website, I saw that there's an alarming number of young boys who actually are raped. And it led me to that part of the book where you said that you went to a rape crisis place and every single poster was about women.
Yeah.
Take me to that place. What were you thinking at that moment when you were about to get help and you turned away?
It's pretty raw still when I think about it. It was a few weeks after my first suicide attempt. And I kind of knew there was something wrong in my life and that I needed to work on this or try and figure out a way out of this or to get help and support. And I was walking through Hillbrow and this poster sign caught my eye. And it said Rape Crisis Center. And I thought, well, that's it, And I can remember pacing outside, trying to build up the courage to walk into the place. And eventually I did, and I pushed the door open very tentatively, and I looked inside. And all I saw were posters of little girls with their panties around their ankles or older women with black eyes. And they always had this hairy fist in the foreground. And I looked at this and I just went, this is not me. This is not me. I'm a boy. I've been raped and abused by both men and women. It's not me. And I just turned around as this person came walking up to me and like, how can we help you? I just turned around and ran out, and that was it. And sort of dealt with it by just pouring myself into a bottle of whiskey for the next 20 odd years. Yeah.
On the website, I saw that the vast majority of homeless people, about 70% of homeless people are men. The vast majority of prisoners are men. And I think that your stats said between 24 to 28 people who commit suicide are men in comparison, on a daily basis, in comparison to women. There are about 4 of them a day that commit suicide.
Well, we need to look at it, in reality, men achieve suicide at higher rates than women do. The attempted suicide part is more or less equal. But men achieve suicide in that we're a lot more forceful about it, So we would do things like hang ourselves and shoot ourselves and that sort of thing. Whereas women would more resort to taking drugs and overdosing and that sort of thing. So, but there is a crisis in that we're not addressing the issues in terms of psychology. We're not making psychology a welcoming place for men to come to. We're not talking about things openly. I mean, I did a talk yesterday at a wellness day, and I said, hey guys, it's International Men's Day, and I got criticism. Well, we're not here for men, things like that. And I was like, but half your staff in this organization are men. We should be addressing them and their mental wellness. But there is this resistance, So a friend of mine sent me a thing the other day. He said it was International Men's Day, but actually it's International Toilet Day too, and that's what the UN recognizes. So International Men's Day is not actually a UN-sanctioned day. So we keeping a toilet day, and men are just kind of claiming these days for themselves, and we're saying we need awareness around these issues, like we've made November and Movember kind of thing, a men's month, not official, but we claiming it, and we're starting to work towards this, and it's important that we do start talking about stories like these. And when I was writing it, I was like, well, I can lie, or I can kind of brush over what happened to me, or I cannot be as honest as I was. But I thought, stuff it. Somebody's got to tell the story. And if it's not going to be me, then who? So I was, a lot of the comments I get after the book is read is, wow, I didn't think you'd be that honest about your life. And I'm going, but what's the point of lying about it? We need to let people know that it happens. Yeah.
So one of the things that I noticed in the book when you were speaking about your relationship with this man is the level of grooming that happens beforehand. So it's not like you arrive one day and then the person says, right, I'm going to abuse you, so let's just get on with it. That doesn't happen. It is actually a periodic thing over time that you start easing into that environment.
Yeah, it took him years. I mean, literally a year and a half, maybe even 2 years. I can't remember exactly, before anything major happened, right? And it was very subtle. And so first he befriended me, and then it was, driving the big BM in those days. All boys love cars, and then it was the boating and skiing and flying and, all that sort of stuff. And then the payback came. Then it was, but even when the payback came, it was very slow, very subtle. It was like, oh, well, why don't you stay over at my place tonight, and then, we'll leave early tomorrow morning so we can get to the dam. That's the best time to ski. And I was nervous, and considering I'm, maybe 14 and a half at this age, at this time. And then it was like, well, where am I going to sleep? No, we just share the bed, it's okay. And it's, and slowly it just developed until years later, it was this full-blown thing. And I didn't have the ability to get out of it, because he'd, in the process, not only sussed me out, but sussed my family out, and realized where I had close bonds with my father, and I saw my father as my hero and that sort of stuff. He knew that if he threatened my father in certain ways, that I would relent and back off. I mean, you think about it, the control, we didn't have cell phones in those days. Yet he coercively controlled me to such an extent that to this day I still fear when a phone rings. I still get anxious. Sometimes, and if there's a number comes up on my phone, I don't know it, I quite often don't answer. And that goes back to those times. So, the fact that traumatic experiences from your past, you kind of carry them into your adult life, and that's the way you deal with things. Not always good, but it's difficult, and it happens.
And I saw that there was quite a shift in you. So there were a lot of things that he provided. There was the flying lessons and the boats and all of that kind of thing. And there became a shift in your mind where it was, if I'm going to be stuck in this situation with this man, then I want to get something out of it.
I might as well capitalize on it, yes.
Yeah.
Which was great at the time. It kind of helped me. At the time it was, well, I'm getting the motorbikes and getting the clothes and the watches and, all that sort of stuff. But it came back to bite me in the butt later during my healing process. It really came in.
In what way?
Well, then I looked at myself and I went, well, actually, you were just a prostitute. You were just selling yourself for stuff. And that part of it I found very difficult to deal with and to process. I really did. It became very difficult to get through that and start seeing myself as a victim and as vulnerable at that time. But yeah, it made it a little bit harder. Healing is never easy.
I think that people do have to understand some of the context, because he actually had numerous passports, numerous aliases. So this wasn't like just your garden variety guy who's checking out the kids in the area. He was a very serious, intentional person.
Very. And I knew all these things. I mean, one day I wasn't, he was out with a friend of his and I was walking around the house alone, and I kind of went through his stuff, and then I found, I swear it must have been about 5 passports. I can't remember the exact number. And they all had different names, a variation of his name, but, all different countries, the UK, South Africa. And I kind of then realized this guy's a crook. And he is. And he would do things. He would buy things on HP, boats, cars, and things like that, and then not pay and disappear and move. And he was just a crook. He was a fraudster, but incredibly intelligent. That I got to tell you. He was. He must have an incredibly high IQ. He would study things, just read about them, and be incredibly wise and well informed about what he was doing. He practiced as a homeopath, as a chiropractor, as a sexologist, back in the day when sexology wasn't even a thing. It was they were talking about it, and he practiced those things, and very successfully. He had a very large client base that trusted him. So yeah.
But what was also sinister to me is, your book is not just outlining that particular element. It is actually outlining that sometimes women are the perpetrators, and sometimes they're perpetrators with their own children.
Yeah.
That was when I was reading it, I'm like, oh my goodness. So, one of the scenes that when my son was very little, obviously I had to wash him. I had to teach him how to wash himself. But there comes that stage where a boy needs to be able to do these things himself.
Yeah.
And some of these women are actually being turned on by the fact that they are bathing their children, and their children are having physical male responses to that. And that was oh my word, people actually do that. So you mentioned there that one of the people that you spoke to had told you about that, but it triggered a memory for you that had been suppressed.
Yeah. So when I started dealing with my healing process, it was an online forum back in the days when internet was relatively new. And I was on this forum, and I started reading the story about this guy. And it was, to this day, I can't find that story. I don't know if it was something that my mind just made up or that I actually read. I can't answer you, honestly. But I read the story, and it was like he went into the bath, and then he heard the car coming home, and then he started getting anxious. Oh my word, don't come into the bathroom, don't come into the bathroom. But then the door unlocked from the outside, and then she came in, and she would take off her shirt. And all of these things are exactly as my mother would do them to me. And then she would start washing. And at that point, I sort of came out of whatever it was. I was reading a story, or I was in this trance, seeing a movie. I came out of that, and then I was cognitively aware of the rest of the story of what happened to me and how she would deal things. She had this process where she would come into the bathroom, take her shirt off, put it in the loo, and then start scrubbing my back. Not with anything nefarious like a floor brush or anything like that. She would just, with a nail brush, she would really scrub my back quite hard until it was red and raw. And then she would scrub behind my ears, and she would say the same stupid thing every time. Oh, we don't want any cauliflowers growing behind you. And I would like, yeah, whatever. And then she would start fondling me until I got erect. And then she would look at me and go, oh, I'm a little big man. Stand up and walk out of the bathroom. That was it, So those are the parts that I can remember, but there are parts that I have flashes of. They're like slideshows, which makes it very difficult to say it was definitely her. So I can't turn around and say, well, 100% it was my mother that performed oral sex on me when I was 5. I can't. It's just flashes of this head, the big bush of hair, performing oral sex on me. So those are the difficult parts that you can't remember. So there's confusion. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe it was. I don't know, But one of the biggest things in that struggle was mourning your childhood. Going through life going, you know what, I never had a mom who hugged me, kissed me, said she was proud of me. I was always there to make her look good. And if I didn't make her look good, then I got punished. And if I did make her look good, then I got rewarded. And that was my life. It was the way I grew up. And unfortunately, I think in the book I say that in my street, 5 boys that I know of were being raped, essentially, by their mothers. And that's just in one street. So if we expand that, how bad is the problem?
When I looked at what you went through, one of the things that you wrote in the book is that one of your earliest paychecks, you went and you bought a firearm. And you were going to commit suicide, but you didn't.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind that stopped you?
It was this weird thing as I would drink. Beside the suicide attempt at 16, there was on the motorbike that my pedophile had bought me, and I was trying to crash into this concrete bridge. But the thing that stopped me was the same every single time. A voice that said, "You would probably stuff this up too." And in an instant, a vision of me in a hospital with all these tubes and ventilators and things coming out of me. I can't move, I can't do anything, but I'm cognitively present. I can hear everything, but I can't speak, right? And then I was in this hospital where these nurses and doctors were laughing and fondling me and doing things to me that I couldn't stop them. I was trapped in my nightmare, right? And then I would pull out of the suicide attempt. And that happened when I bought the firearm. That happened 4 times that I can remember. I would get drunk. I would start going through, oh, my life is a mess. Why me? It's horrible. Best thing is just shoot myself. And as I would do everything, cock the pistol, take the safety off, put it in my mouth. I could feel, to this day, I can still feel that resting on my lip, in my mouth. And then this thing, I would just cry and cry, and my finger would be shaking, my hand would be shaking. And then this voice would go, "Oh, you probably cock this, or you probably stuff this up too." And then again, that vision of it being in the hospital, this time with half a brain gone, but still aware of everything and unable to talk or respond or do anything. And that every single time would be the thing that pulled me out of it, And it was only many, many years later, and it's not even the book, because after I'd written the book, I think, I was in a therapy session with a client. I do a lot of group sessions, and this guy said something, and this voice popped into my head, and I realized who it was. It was all along. So as horrid as my mother was, that phrase saved me at least 5 times that I know of. You'll probably stuff this up too. Because as a little boy, I always had this very active mind, and I wanted to redo the garden, and I wanted to redo the bedrooms, and she would always say, "Oh, you're just going to mess it up. You're going to stuff this up too," And I would start, and then, of course, I would live up to her expectations. I would stuff it up and not finish. And that, again, another childhood trait that we carry across into our adult lives, where you start things and don't finish them. So for me, it's still a struggle where I go, okay, I'm going to start this thing and I have to finish it. Now it's become like a driving force to get things done for me. They might take a year, but I'll get them done.
So you mentioned in the book for one of your ex-wife was watching something with your daughter, an Oprah show, when you actually first discovered that this is a real thing for other men.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was a full-blown alcoholic. I was drinking a bottle a day up until the age of about 42, and I stopped drinking. I managed that on my own without any support. It was really difficult. The one thing I never lost was the desire to drink. I was still, when I saw somebody else drinking, there was still that thing that was like, oh, I wish I could have a drink, It would just take the edge off and all that sort of thing. But then 2 years later, I was 44, and I came home one day in the afternoon. I avoided home because my ex-wife, you see, I used to drive home going like, I wonder what I've done wrong today, because I knew I was in trouble for something. It was, I was just always in trouble, right? So came into the house, and she was in lounge with my daughter, who was probably, 7 at the time. And the Oprah show was on, and it was Tyler Perry, and it was called The 200 Men. And I sat there, and I kind of heard it, in the background, not really paying attention. And all of a sudden, my ex stood up and said, I think you should watch this. And she took my daughter out of the room, and I started listening to these men, and there was 200 men talking about me. It was the craziest visceral experience I've ever had in my life, really, like an out-of-body experience. But these guys are talking about me, and they understood myself better than I did. They were talking about the way I felt. They were talking about how I responded to things, and I was like, what the dickens is going on here, And I listened, and I would hear these guys going, when I was raped as a child, and I go, yeah, that didn't happen to me. When I was molested as a child, no, that didn't happen to me. Yeah, now I'm waiting for this all to come to, okay, tell me what's wrong with me now, It was sort of scary and exciting at the same time. And then right at the end, the last guy that spoke said this. He said, I just want to say to you guys, if you're a father, you would never hurt your children because you love them too much. And that was it for me. Man, that floored me. It felt like I'd been punched in the solar plexus by Mike Tyson, I promise you. And I started crying for the first time in my life. And I didn't stop essentially for like 6 months. I just cried. If people looked at me strangely, I would cry. If people said nice things to me, I would cry. It was ridiculous. I was just this well of tears. I think like 44 years of tears stored up that just poured out. And it took me back to a day when I was changing my daughter's nappy, and this little angel or little devil popped up on my shoulder and said, you're going to hurt her. You're going to stick your finger in there. You're going to do these things. And I was like, what? It's my daughter. I've always wanted to have a child, and I would never hurt her. Then this angel popped up and said, you won't hurt her because you love her too much. And then the devil was like, no, you're going to. No, you're not. No. And eventually I was like, okay, only one way to deal with this. I got to shut these voices in my head up, right? Alcohol is my favorite coping mechanism. And my drinking got worse. I used to come home from work and I would have a double tot of gin. Then I would just pour a glass and just down it. And I kind of knew that if I could get drunk enough, quick enough, my wife would not let me touch my daughter. And that was what I wanted to achieve. And I did weird things, like I would bath her in the middle of winter with the door open so that people could see, to walk past and see me. So I kind of held myself accountable all the time. But that changed. All those thoughts and things just disappeared when I heard these 200 men talking about it. And then we start the healing process, and then we get to that point where I remembered what my mom did to me, and that's when I sat back and I went like, man, this is so hard. There's no support. There's literally, when I say no support, I mean no support, right? You're alone in this. There's online, it's kind of ragged and jaggedy. You can't go to a psychologist and say, hey, I was raped as a child, because they go like, what? You're a man, you can't be. And that happened to me several times, by the way. When I was going through this journey, I speak about not being able to find help. And that's true. There wasn't too much help available. But things have changed a lot. So please don't try and do this alone. Please don't struggle. Reach out to somebody that can help you. Thanks for watching this podcast. So you're just alone, and you're dealing with all of this stuff, and you're just plowing through it day to day. It was the first 6 months of my healing process. That's all I did. I survived. I just survived. But I had this intense desire to learn as much as I could about the impacts of this sort of trauma on the adult. Right? And eventually when I remembered what my mom had done to me, then I just sat back and I said, look, this is too hard. This is so hard, really. I got to do something to help men recover from this. And at that point, we were kind of dealing with the 1 in 6 men, 1 in 4 girls kind of theory. I didn't realize I had a gut feel that it wasn't as light as that. I mean, it's still bad. It's still like a pandemic, right? But yeah, I only discovered much later that it was a lot worse than that in South Africa. But that was kind of the night MatrixMen was born, when the concept of MatrixMen was born. Yeah.
So tell me about writing the actual book.
Do I have to?
Yes.
Gee.
What was that moment where you thought to yourself, I actually have to write this down?
It wasn't, for me, it wasn't a conscious decision as in, like, I'm going to write my story. It wasn't. There was a guy I was supporting in Australia. His name in the book is Neil. And Neil kept saying to me, Martin, as he started revealing more and more and more of the trauma that he'd gone through in life. I mean, I look at his life and I go, like, mine was a breeze. Mine was, Neil's stuff was intense. It was really, really tragic. Also, from a very young age, to the age of 42, he was a victim of rape and sexual abuse. And he just kept saying to me, Martin, write my story, write my story, write my story. Somebody's got to tell my story. So I started, and I was kind of writing Neil's story. And I got, about 4 or 5 chapters in, and I thought, this is ridiculous, man. I can't empathize with what he's going through. I can't put in how I feel. I'm writing somebody else's story, and I've never done this before, right? So I thought, you know what, I need to try. So I deleted everything. It's great, so many thousand words, and you just go delete. And I started again, and I started a different format, and I again got to 4th, 5th chapter, deleted everything. And so I kind of had, by the 3rd start, I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell my story, but I'm going to bring in aspects of other people's stories through, the organization that I'd started. And I then started writing, and it was intense. It was not an easy journey. It really wasn't. And I would start writing, and then I would leave it for 6 months and just go out. I can't deal with it, all right? And then start writing again, and then leave it. And then, so it took 12 horrible years to get through this. But eventually, I think toward the end, and I'm glad it happened that way, because I started bringing into the book a lot of science, neuroscience. I started bringing in a lot of research that I'd found, and I started bringing different aspects. So it's not just it's not my story, tragic story and recovery and victory and, overcoming and all that sort of stuff. It brings in different aspects for different people, how they felt about it, how they came to a place where they started healing. And I hope you could tell me better than I can. I hope I delivered that. I hope I delivered.
Think it definitely did deliver, because I think the challenge that we have is when people tell you about their recovery, they don't always go into the nitty-gritties of what happened. And your book is very raw. Just even with the pedophile, as he was starting to introduce you to the sexuality side of it, it was so gradual in little bits and increments that, people can then understand how it happened.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what people need to hear. I mean, I've got an 11-year-old son, and at the moment I'm busy going through this course. It's a free course that you do to identify potential victims of human trafficking. And in there, they've got a section on grooming, particularly on the online gaming side. So it's a very different space to what the situation that you were in. And my son does do a lot of online gaming. So when I look at that, then I'm like, these are things that he needs to know about. He needs to understand grooming and needs to understand the kinds of things that people say to you to make you feel safe, psychologically safe.
Yes.
And then that's when the hammer falls, and then it's not so safe anymore. So I think that this is a really great way I think parents should read it. Obviously, you're positioning it at men, but I think parents need to read it so that they can understand that the world is not as safe as what we think it is, and you need to take steps and be intentional about looking out for your kids, asking them questions. I did love the part where your father punched the guy in the face.
Oh, me too. Yes.
That was a good moment. But Martin, thank you so much for being on the show, sharing with people about what you went through. And so men, you can actually reach out, look at this book. Martin does offer sessions as well, particularly if you're in the South African space. And just take these kinds of things seriously. If you're a parent, I would advise that you read the book because it's a lot more prevalent than what we think. Just recently, I know of a lady whose son had committed suicide because he was a victim of sexual abuse by a teacher for a really long time period. And so these are things that we cannot bury our heads in the sand.